Welcome to Commander Pop Culture, a place to gather magical information, with some laughs, might I add. Fugitive of Jadoon, the saga that, on the first chapter, you make a 1/1 human and a 4/4 rhino. Second chapter, you investigate. On the last chapter, you could sack that human and your clue token to search for a doctor and put into play. It just undoes the first two chapters, so it's a bit of a feel bad.
Good call.
And when I play a saga, I want everything to be progressing my game plan, not rewinding it. For 5 mana, that also just feels expensive for an effect that you don't want to wait for. I guess the nice part is you put it into play. It's the trade-off, I guess. Heaven Sent. This card's really cool because the first 2 chapters you investigate, and then on the final chapter, you get to deal damage to each opponent. If someone dies to that, you draw 7 cards. But if you don't kill someone with this, you are allotted the opportunity to recast this saga. This could be a nice little source of card advantage, just passively making clue tokens. Doesn't seem like a bad deal. The Girl in the Fireplace. This saga feels weird because the final chapter, you want as many creatures as you can to make connections so you could get a lot of time travel triggers. The only thing though is the human noble you make on the first chapter doesn't have evasion, and neither does the horse you make, but it gives all your doctors horsemanship. I imagine the doctors are very mid-rangey, so how many can you possibly have in one play to really pursue that? Just feels like a waste of effort and time in a game that's already really fast. Everybody Lives. This is a really sweet instant in that it compares to Angel's Grace, where you can't lose the game. But not only do you not lose the game, it also prevents players from winning the game. It just hoses off a little bit of everything. Could really wreck Thassa's Oracle decks that are doing demonic consultations because they won't have a library to play the game anymore. Angel's Grace is a staple in white. I see this also being a staple in white. It's going to be an expensive card. It's a saga where the first chapter is a board wipe, and then the second chapter you get to return a legendary creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. My rule with board wipes is 4 mana is like the gold standard. If you're paying more for a board wipe, it better do something extra, and the 2 mana to return something seems like a fair and sweet deal. Curse of Fenric. This card's really convoluted and weird. It's a saga that eventually kills 4 creatures in play. On the first chapter, destroy 3 creatures, and in exchange that person gets a 3/3 mutant. On the second chapter, you turn something into a 6/6 creature named Fenric. On that final chapter, Fenric and one of those death-touching tokens you gave everybody fight each other, so in total you destroy 4 creatures with this. If you don't mind giving those significantly stat increases and you could survive, this is a dense little card for removal. Trial of the Time Lord. This feels like a Will of the Consuls on a saga, because on the final chapter, have everybody vote. If Guilty gets more votes, all the creatures you exile with this gets put on the bottom of their libraries.
You can see it on his smug little face. Guilty, I say guilty.
If they don't, then everything comes back, and that just feels kind of bad. But who knows? I mean, that's a lot of turns, especially if that first trigger. The first chapter sucks because you can only put sun counters on tapped creatures, but the second through the 4th chapters are really good. For each non-saga permanent, you have to put additional counters of that counter type on it. Planeswalkers, if you're playing +1/+1 counter themes, or just anything that has a counter theme to it, you'll want to play this, and then you get to tutor up a doctor. What's not to like? Reverse Polarity. This is a modal counterspell, only the counterspell action is really good. It lets you counter all other spells on the stack, so it counters specifically Storm decks. There aren't a lot of counter magic spells out there that do this. I imagine the making something unblockable or switching a creature's power and toughness is going to be rare. War games, this feels weird because you give everyone warrior tokens that are goated, and then on the second and third chapters you're putting counters on the stuff. People would use their tokens to block their tokens, and then it doesn't really matter. And then on the final trigger, you get to exile a non-token creature you control. If you do, exile all warriors. Hopefully everyone's dead. I feel like the final chapter on this is just a dud. Doesn't make any sense. I guess a lot of things on this card doesn't make any sense, and I'm not really feeling it. Just feels like a waste of time. The Unearthly Child. All chapters are the same. It's a card advantage piece that digs specifically for doctors, companions, and vehicles, and it puts it in your hand, so that's kind of nice. Hopefully you're running enough of those permanents to warrant playing this. For 3 mana, that seems like a really sweet deal. I like this card a lot. I like that they included vehicles on this because there are a significant amount of vehicles in the world of Magic that's worth you digging for. Weeping Angel, Flash, and Flying and Vigilance. This is an interesting card. It's a combat trick on a creature. Whenever it deals damage to a creature, the damage gets prevented and you force them to shuffle their creature into their library. The caveat though is once someone casts a creature spell, your angel turns into just an artifact that can't attack or block anything. You could get someone once with this pretty consistently, but beyond that, not so much.
Fool me once, shame on you.
The Vigilance clause is nice, so you could be aggressive with it and leave it up to block, and it forces people to play creatures main phase 1, which I guess is desirable if you're playing a control list, because most people wait till main phase 2 to do anything, and this kind of just forces people to play stuff at inopportunistic moments, and that's probably all the application this thing has. Clara Oswald. You get to choose a color to be added to your commander deck, doubles your doctor triggers, and it's a companion, 6 mana to cast, so it's a little steep for a 2/6 vanilla creature. The 12th Doctor gives all your spells demonstrate, or at least the first spell you cast. That's pretty significant. If you don't know what demonstrate is, by the way, you propose an offer to an opponent, and if they choose to make a copy as well, you get a second copy. In turn, you get the better end of the deal, which is why demonstrate is such a sweet mechanic from Strixhaven. The fact that you could copy anything, it's a first in the Magic world, so it's a cool doctor. Definitely worth copying with Clara Oswald. And then you get to size them up when you copy a spell. Other partner of Rory Williams. Rory Williams was that weird blue-white creature where you get punished for playing it from your command zone. It's interesting because whenever Amy Pond deals damage to player, you get to remove that many counters from a suspended card, i.e. your Rory Williams, but I feel like the better application of this is just to be playing a suspend deck and removing counters that way instead of pursuing just Rory Williams. If you're removing suspend counters off Rory Williams, it doesn't feel impactful enough. But if you remove suspend counters off anything else, that could be impactful. 11th Doctor. On a combat damage trigger, you get to suspend any card from your hand, and then you can make any creature with power 3 or less unblockable, so it combos with itself. If you manage to give this double strike, you get the dream, because you get to start suspending 2 cards instead of just 1. If you don't know the applications of suspend, it's to help you cheat out really big expensive cards. The drawback of the suspend is that the number of counters that go on it is equal to its CMC, so you could end up waiting an incredible amount of time to cast those spells, but we've seen a fair amount of support for removing time counters, so I think it'll be worth your time pursuing. Donna Noble, it has Soul Bond. It and the paired creature, when they deal damage, it deals that much damage to a target opponent. You basically double your damage up on someone or spread out the love to others. It's not a bad Doctor Companion. I like that it has Soul Bond too. I wish most of the Doctor's Companions actually had Soul Bond on them because it kind of makes sense flavor-wise. 9th Doctor. It's a 2/4 with haste. When it becomes untapped, you get an additional upkeep, and on your upkeep trigger, you remove suspend counters. Definitely going to be a staple. 8th Doctor has an ETB mill effect. On once of your turns, you get to cast Historic Permanent or a Historic Land from your graveyard. Because it's 6 mana to cast, it'll be a little clunky because your mana will be taxed. You will be looking for a historic land, and there aren't a lot in Magic to be played to get the maximum amount of value from this. The other thing that sucks is if you had to make that land drop on your turn 6 in order to cast this, then you miss out on the land drop and just the first chance you get in general. This just feels like you'll have to wait. Thumbs down here. Ace, Fearless Rebel. It has an attack trigger where you sack an artifact to put a counter on this and fight something. I don't like this card that much. I don't like the idea of trading off resources for a slight stat increase to maybe kill something.
And leave a bad taste in the mouth.
Because it's situational removal. I guess the best part about this is it's a companion for doctors. It only fits niche decks where you're making frivolous artifact tokens, I think. Like food. 7th Doctor. when he attacks, you play mind games with an opponent. They have to guess the CMC, whether it's less than or greater than a number of artifacts you control. If they guess wrong, you get to cast the spell for free. You have a 50-50 chance. I don't know if it's worth pursuing because you can only get one trigger a turn and there's a significant amount of risk that you get nothing. But if they guess right, then at the very least, you get a clue token to increase your artifact count to go again. Perry Brown, the Doctor's Companion, gives your first historic spell Convoke. Anything that does cost reduction for just hanging out is a good deal. I think a lot of historic decks will appreciate this. Oh, it also says each turn. Doesn't specifically say your turns. I think she'll find a home in a lot of those blue-white flash decks. There's a lot of commanders that give flash to creatures, and I think she'll be perfect in those decks. Sixth Doctor. This copies historic spells, only it's not legendary. Copying legendary stuff is also really good. You're breaking the fair parts of the legendary clause. The cards are legendary for a reason. Tegan Yovanka, another Doctor's Companion, protects your historic creature and gives it +1/+1 until end of turn. Doesn't sound bad. I think it will go in a lot of Voltron decks, that's for sure. Fifth Doctor. On your end step, you get to untap each creature that didn't attack and didn't enter the battlefield this turn, and put a +1/+1 counter on it. I love effects that untap your stuff on end step. I could see myself using this in a lot of decks. It has a lot of fair clauses in that you're not allowed to attack with the thing, not allowed to get the effect on things that just entered, but normally you play these kinds of effects in Tim decks where you're tapping creatures. You don't necessarily care about dealing combat damage in those decks. You have some other means of winning, and that's why you played these kinds of effects to begin with. The creatures that you're dumping in suffer summoning sickness anyways, so you can't untap them, so what do you really care at that point? Joe Grant, Doctor's Companion, gives all your historic cards cycling. Whenever you cycle a card, put a +1/+1 counter on her. I don't like that it's 3 mana. That seems a little steep. Third Doctor. It's a 2/2 a trample that gets sized up from your non-creature tokens. And on ETB, you make a clue, a food, or a treasure. The only thing that sucks is that like treasures and clue tokens are usable. They're a valuable resource and you'll want to sacrifice them. I think if you're in a shell where you're just making a lot of those tokens all the time, I think you'll appreciate this guy. Jamie McCrimmon, Doctor's Companion, and when you cast a historic spell, you size this creature up. It already has trample. Your card slots are important. I don't know how big you could consistently make this. Like if you're playing a historics deck, you could size this up into a lethal attacker since you're playing it as a commander from your command zone, I imagine. Second Doctor. This is a hug kind of card. Everyone has no max hand size, and then you give like an offering. Everyone's allowed to draw a card, but for every opponent who does, they can't attack you or perms you control during their next turn. If you're playing Planeswalkers, that's a significant trigger. Can make people really think about drawing or not. Another Doctor's Companion. It's a mana dork though. Oh, and it synergizes with playing Plane Chase. If you would ever Planeswalk, you look at the top 2 cards and you get to choose to put one on the bottom and the other on top of the deck. That gives you a lot of insider information for what comes next, and you can really take good advantage of that. Plane Chase games can be really swingy. They're either really long games or they're really fast games, and since you have that kind of access to knowledge, you could probably do something with this. So that's something that like you just throw into any deck. Like you have to be consistently playing a lot of Plane Chase to be like, I'm gonna have this as my commander. Outside of that, I don't think you'll see too much. First Doc, you search your library and or graveyard for TARDIS. Whenever you cast a spell with Cascade, put a +1/+1 counter on an artifact or creature. Interesting card advantage spell. You exile the top 3 cards of your library, and then you may play those cards until end of turn. I like the art on this. Reminds me of Vincent Van Gogh. Nanogene Conversion. This is one of the cheapest versions of this kind of effect. I think it's called Clone Legion, and it's like 6 or 7 mana. Where you do this effect, you basically make every creature you control into a copy of a target creature until end of turn. Except it isn't legendary, so you could copy a legendary thing and probably break the game with this. For the efficient cost of 4 mana, this is a really good card if you built the deck for it. The other trade-off, though, is it affects your opponent's creatures, so you gotta be kind of careful. If you're playing against a token deck, maybe you don't want to play this card. Could be a little situational. Some things I wanted to talk about. I guess you stuck around to hear the applications of these cards and like the compare and contrast. What's not worth your time and what's worth your time. If you liked what you saw, I'm going to be covering all the spoilers of Doctor Who. So subscribe and you'll be notified of my next video. Hope everyone had a great time. Have a great day. Bye.